twice in one
Yeah.
weekend. 2 months preaching.
Yeah, I know, I told her.
We're down there right by my
Yeah, I'll tell you, we went on that fishing trip. We went on a
Coming
fishing
back,
trip.
and we were right there.
Just got ready.
I found it's got all the roof.
It's down there, and I'm standing here.
If I can have your attention, please. I'd like to welcome everyone for the next episode regarding law enforcement. We have quite a few retired officers here, and we will be talking about some history of the department, a few things about some recollections of some of us, as we call ourselves, old timers, of law enforcement here in Central Illinois. We're also honored to have with us Jerry Dawson, our former sheriff. Got chief on the mind. If you wouldn't mind coming up and be sharing some of your experiences with the sheriff's department.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, Chief. Let's see, where to begin? I was a third-year student at SIU. I come home for the summer, and I was in law enforcement, so that was always, I had a grandfather in Sterling PD and other family members that were in law enforcement, so I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I come home after my junior year, and I run into Jerry Wagner Senior, and I said, hey, when are you testing? He goes, well, you missed it by 2 weeks. He says, I know the county is taking applications, so I pulled out a county application, and then 2 weeks before my senior year started, I was hired. So that's how I started. Now back then, the old jail was on top of the courthouse, and they didn't really have a whole lot of correctional officers, so deputies worked the jail. And you had to do that until there was an opening on patrol. And they just basically threw me a ring of keys, said, you know, you got this cell block over here, and I didn't know what I was doing. I'm on the backside of 21, and you know, I played a little football down there. I thought I was kind of a tough guy. Well, inmates pick up on that, so I learned real quick, you really can't try to be a tough guy. But it was real frustrating, and I'm like, man, school hasn't started yet. Maybe I can go back for my senior year. And it's about the end of the shift, and I hear the jail elevator clang open, and I hear somebody say, hey, where's the new guy? And they said, he's back there somewhere. And here comes Roger Walker, and he's got this lime green suit, and he's got this afro about this big. And he says, hey, Dawson, I did your background, and I know you played slow pitch softball. You know, our season's over, but I want you to be on our softball team. So I went from, man, I got to get out of here. This is the biggest mistake of my life, to, well, maybe I'll stick around. And I'm glad I did, because, you know, 31 years later, walked out of there with a pretty good career. But I did that for about a year, and then I kind of made a name for myself because I knew everybody in Decatur that got arrested because we saw them every day. So I'd be just patrolling down. I'd run Joe Blow, and of course Joe Blow had a warrant. I had a pretty decent rapport with most of them. Hey Joe, you got a warrant? I'd take them in, and they'd say, well, this Dawson, he's a go-getter. I wasn't a go-getter, I just ran names. So I did that for about a year. Or after a year I got out, I did patrol for about another 4 years. So after my 5th year, I made detective. Did that for about 5 years. And I will say, out of my 31 years with the sheriff's office, that was probably my most fulfilling, because they would just give you a case with no leads, no nothing, and you could cultivate that and really work on it and end up putting handcuffs on a guy. I mean, you just felt good. You slept good at night, and especially if you had a very heinous crime involving kids or whatever it is, and you were able to put that scumbag in jail, I mean, I felt good. And so got promoted. Guess where I go after I get promoted? Back to the jail. Sergeant, all sergeants go back to jail. Of course, this is still the old jail. It's like, man, this is like a bad penny. So I did that till I got on patrol, and did that for about another 7, 8 years. Finally make lieutenant. And guess where the new lieutenants go? You're the jail warden. So, now, at least now it's a new jail. So there's electronics, and they had places to put inmates that were beyond control. And so it was a little different atmosphere than that old jail, because you got nothing. It was you and them. And we had the whole, there was no restraint chairs. There was none of these things that you could use when they're completely out of control. So learned that. Of course, corrections is kind of in your blood with the sheriff's office, because the sheriff is responsible for the county jail. So I did that. Again, Roger Walker gets elected, and it's like, Roger, get me out of here. So he brings me down. He doesn't promote me, because I think he wanted to make me, earn it. Now, one thing about Roger, if he was like a lieutenant on the shift, I was his sergeant. We got along really well. We worked together. He covered me a couple of times. I covered for him a couple of times. But that's kind of what you did. And I'm not talking about big things or anything illegal, just little things. Because sometimes we weren't on the best of terms with the sheriff at the time. But so Roger got elected, and he brought me down, and not only was I his exec or the captain, but I was also the chief of detectives. And man, I worked my tail off. But after about 6 months, he went ahead and promoted me to captain, and then we were able to bring in the chief of detectives. So I did that. I never wanted to be the sheriff. Never. Matter of fact, when I had the authority to actually look in personnel files, so I pulled mine up, and I'm looking through there, and for the, they put out a letter, if you're interested in this detective opening, put in a letter. Well, in this letter, I said how I never wanted to be the sheriff, but I'd love to be the captain, and, blah, blah, blah. So I thought that was kind of funny. So things are going good, and Roger comes to me and says, I think I'm leaving. I'm going to be offered this position running the state prison system. I'm thinking, hey, that's great. Well, I'm at about 25 years, so still too young to retire, but too old to just go somewhere after 25 years. But I just didn't want to be involved in politics. And then I get wind that they really kind of want a political guy and not somebody through the ranks. So that kind of just got me putting my heels in a little bit. Well, I'm going to go with this all out. I want this position because I don't want an outsider to come in here that really doesn't know even where the doors lead to, but who's good at what. Just the history of all the guys that they're your other family at this point. So I did get elected twice, and then ended up turning over to Snag. But I wouldn't give it up for anything. When I was 21, I didn't even know you had a pension. I didn't care. I wanted to be a cop. And then as much as I hated working that jail that first year, I learned so much more stuff that you'll never get out of a psychology book on how to talk to people, how to handle people. So like when we would have what we call a 10-16 or a family fight, you were able to just cope with everybody screaming and yelling. Wilson can tell you, that's all you get in jail, everybody screaming and yelling. So even though you just didn't enjoy going into work, you learned a lot of things, and boy, that really helped later on in my career. But as far as things have changed, obviously when I first started, there wasn't a mountain of paperwork. I think if you look at there revised statutes when I started it, Illinois compiled statutes now. And I don't know how many, Diane can tell you how many volumes there are, but there's like 15. There was like 3 in a little glossary or an index about this big. So you didn't have the laws that you have now and all the complications that come in with that. And you just handled a lot of things just by the seat of your pants. And you know, as I was getting on in my career as a sheriff, you know, I could see the changes where everything was liability. Too close. Oh, close. Everything was liability, and it wasn't the way I started with and what I knew. So I knew it was time. You know, Tom Snyder, I was kind of grooming him because I had great staff, but you know, one thing about Tom, he was always willing to go to the meetings and do the stuff that wasn't fun. So I kind of thought, well, you know, he's got the temperament. I think he would do a good job at that. So I had to run for a 2-year term because Roger left early. So I go to Steve Bean and I said, how long can I work where I don't have to make Tom run a 2-year term? And he told me the date, and I said, okay, that's when I'm going to retire. I thought I was going to be this great teacher. I go to the Tech Academy with high school kids, and it was not fun. But anyway, I've got no regrets. I saw a lot of changes in those 31 years, but I met a lot of them in this room. I've met friends for life. You know, you would literally lay down your life out there on a call for them. And it's just, it was just a great career. You know, it wasn't unusual to have just 2 deputies working on, especially midnight shift. And I actually worked midnight shift on 2 occasions by myself. One on a Friday night, and we call it settle on a quarter, SOC. I was SOC and stuff that was, these people really need to go to jail, but what am I going to do? I got 3 calls I'm waiting to get to. So, you know, you did what you had to do. But it was just a great career. Another thing I'd like to mention, when I started out in the county, you either had a farmhouse or some shack that some bum was living in. You know, now, I mean, these homes that were built out in these rural areas is just unbelievable. So, I mean, we had our subdivisions. A lot of them, you know, Decatur eventually brought in. So, you know, we were busy just on the outskirts of town, but it was just a different environment out in the county. Now so that's where a lot of your money went to, unfortunately, for the city of Decatur. You know, these homes out there. So that's kind of had an impact on the city that I really hate to see. But, you know, that's about it, unless anybody has questions.
Jerry, do you remember the Jesus people from the late 70s?
Yeah, that was actually right before my time, but I mean, I was in high school and college when that, we dealt with it a very little bit. They were kind of dying out when I first got on the street.
Well, I was 3rd shift patrolman, and we would take them to the jail, and the elevator had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 J for jail, and they'd look at that and say J for Jesus. I always thought you guys probably loved us bringing Jesus people.
Well, when I actually started in the jail, the older deputies were saying, "Oh, you should have been here last year." We had them in the hallways and the catwalks, and they're out here on the floor. And because you know, back then you might have 60, 70 people in the jail. You know, they had all of a sudden they had like 130, so it was a mess. But you know, if somebody got arrested in a serious felony, they would still go to trial in about 4 or 5 months. If they were still there 5 or 6 months, it was really unusual. By the time I left as sheriff, we had people in there 3 years waiting to go. And it isn't like, well, we're violating their rights. They're playing cat and mouse games just to prolong and hoping the witnesses die or something. But that really changed. And when I was a warden, I was real frustrated with just not being able to process people. But everybody was in the same boat that we were in. You know, didn't have the staff, didn't have the manpower, didn't have the funds to do what really needed to be done. But you know, we may do. But you know, getting back to where there's one or two of you on the street, that's just not a good feeling when you pull up and you've got a bunch of burly guys that are upset because the Bears lost that day, and you know you don't have a backup. There are a couple of bars out there by Weichels Corner, and you got no backup, and you got guys that are pretty upset. So you had to learn your people skills pretty quick in situations like that. But never fired my weapon, had it out a million times. I was at situations where bullets actually were shot, but I mean, I was very fortunate. I thank God every day, you know, I was able to go home to my family, and you know, that's something you're always concerned about. But I work with people that didn't make it home, so I thank God for what He gave me during my career. That's another thing. Didn't really have a real strong faith. I mean, I was a cradle Catholic, and we always went to Mass, but it was kind of like a, you know, you go or Big Jim's going to hit me with a 2x4. But as my career went on, and I started to see some of the victims and how evil some people are in this world, I really started to grow in faith as time went on, because you know you start thinking, and especially my detective days, I go home and sometimes you didn't go to sleep because of what you saw and what you dealt with. But again, you know, if you were able to bring that bad guy to justice and see him get sent away, it really lifted your spirits. So, anybody else have any questions? I mean, I can tell you, when I started, it was $9,850 a year. But I was actually summer help at Staley's that summer, and I was making the equivalent of $12,000 a year. So, and Staley's didn't like it. If you weren't going back to college, you know, they frowned upon it. So I kind of told them, well, I'm going to the sheriff's office. And why did we hire you? We're hiring college kids. But all the guys I worked with in this 44 building said, why don't you just stay here? That, you know, make $12,000, not $10,000. But you know, I wanted to be a cop, and as much as throwing 100-pound bags kept you in shape, I wanted to be a cop. And so that's what I did. Well, I appreciate Ed. Go.
No questions, comments, Sheriff. I had the privilege of working with 4 sheriffs, all great in their own areas, but by far you're the best sheriff I've worked for. Thank you for your service.
Like I said, I'll get you that 20 later. I'd like to make a comment about Ed Culp. So, Roger brings me out of the jail, and he goes, you know, you got to run detectives, but you also got to do all the captain work. So I kind of thought Ed was a little bit of a suck-up. He worked very hard, and I knew that. So I'm kind of messing with him. I'm giving him these cases that you would normally just file because there's just absolutely no witnesses, no nothing. And so I'm handing him these cases, like in the back of my mind, I'm just chuckling, like, yeah, let me see you do something with this. So it isn't even noon, and I'm in the office, and I see a guy go by with handcuffed behind his back, and there's Ed. I go, Ed, what's that? He goes, well, that case you gave me. The case where there's no nothing. He goes, yeah, but blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, well, it's a fluke. You know, that kid got lucky. So, same thing next time. I give him a case, absolutely no leads, no witnesses, no nothing. And I give it to him. comes a guy in handcuffs with Ed, go in this interview room. Go ahead, well, that case you gave me this morning. I'm thinking, long story short, you know, less than a year later, I'm thinking this guy is one of the best detectives, you know, and I used to think when I first started, Mark Chevron was just a great interviewer, and Mark doesn't like it, but I said, I put Ed Cope up to you. And Ed was. I mean, Ed helped crack this interstate tractor ring where they were stealing heavy equipment. You know, it was into Iowa and Missouri. Ed pretty much was the key player, the key investigator. And we had the state police and obviously other agencies, but I'm telling you that this guy, and you know, he was kind of a hard nose. He's a Marine, and but so some of the guys would complain about him. But I'm telling you, you know, we had a guy deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. Ed took his kids. His boys were, you know, between like 5 and 9, and he would take them to ball games. He would just take them out to eat, and he made sure while this deputy was deployed that those kids had somebody they could, you know, just lean on, and just little things like that. Jeff Bush, who was a great friend of mine, died suddenly, and I asked Ed, like, you know, because I'm not good at like we're gonna line up here and do that. I wasn't in the service. I just gave the whole thing to Ed, and I didn't have to worry about it. You know, I knew that it would be taken care of because Ed Cope was handling it, and you know, came off without a stitch. So just it was people like him that helped me have a successful career. So Ed, I know you meant that when you said that. I'm joking about giving you money, but you earned everything, all the accolades that you've gotten too. So thank you very much for being my friend too. Okay. Todd, you want the hot seat?
That's up to Jim.
Thank you.
Oh, boy, can I get up?
This is a good segue into retired Chief Walker. If he could come up and tell us a little bit about his career. What's your question, Chief?
Oh, no, I wasn't. But that's kind of a hard act to follow. Jerry Dawson was a great sheriff, and I got the being with the city police. We had great relations with the sheriff's department, but the two that I was probably the most fondest of was Roger Walker, new relation, we looked a lot alike, and then Jerry Dawson. And they were the best. But I don't know where to start. I had a grandfather that was with the Decatur police. He died when I was 1 year old. He was an acting chief of police when he passed away. And he was also in charge at that time for what they called in the city of Decatur like civil disaster, civil air defense and stuff. So he was in charge of that. And I grew up listening to stories from my grandmother and my mom and reading. And my grandmother had kept a meticulous scrapbook about my grandfather. So that's how I grew up reading that. And I knew from really an early age that is what I wanted to do. And I knew I wanted to go with the Decatur police. But so I was the first to go to college in my family. Back then, Decatur had a requirement that you had to have a college degree. And so I went to college, and I think I was the second intern with the Decatur police. And back then, in order to finish my degree, you had to do an internship, but they didn't allow interns to ride with uniform patrol. So I got stuck with guys like Mark Bartholomew and Doug Raver and Pat McElroy and they were juvenile detectives, and honestly, they were great role models. I don't want to talk about the stories that they had at that time since this is being recorded, but they were fantastic. And Jim was, or Chief Williams was in the detective bureau at that time and stuff. And you had to write a daily, for my part of my degree, you had to write a daily, like a journal. And then I had to have that approved and read before I could send it off. And I thought, man, I want to make sure I write down what I was going to do. And another gentleman that I had was Ward Davis. And I remember my very first day, I showed up, I had a 71 Chevelle, and it had a loud muffler. I couldn't afford to fix anything on it. I had no heat, and Ward Davis was there. And he rode in on a moped, and he had this big pink suit on. And he didn't know who I was, and when I pulled in that lot, he goes, "You need to get that muffler fixed." And I thought, well, I don't have any money to get that muffler fixed. He didn't know who I was, and then when I followed him into the police department at 707 East Wood, he learned that I was an intern there, and I got stuck with him on the first day. And it was probably one of the greatest memories I ever had. He got sent to the adult detectives were tied up, so the juvenile detectives were sent, Ward was sent to a deceased individual that had passed away on an industrial accident. And I went there, and other than a family member, that was the first time I had seen somebody that had passed away on the job. And we went there, and then we went to the hospital, and there was the victim's wife was there, and she had 3 young little babies with her. And I was just shocked and traumatized. And when we got done, Ward goes, "Are you hungry?" And I go, "Well, not really after what I just saw." And we went to Mr. G's in Decatur, and he was buying Chicago dogs and everything. And I thought, what have I signed up for here? But that was the start of what would turn into be almost a 3-decade career. I tested with Decatur, and I had tested like a lot of guys do with other agencies. I got the call with Decatur, and I started with Decatur in 1986, and it turned into a great career. I wish I would have kept meticulous notes. One thing I did early on was keep a scrapbook like my grandfather had kept. And so back then the news media was really involved. You keep clippings and pictures. And back then we had Polaroid cameras, so you would start out but taking pictures of things that I saw and kept them. But I had a good career. In 1986 I started, and in 1990 they had the sergeant's test, and I was always told by these guys, "Oh, you got to take the sergeant's test, for practice." And so I did. I took it for practice. And I remember coming home and telling my wife at the time, I said, "Whoever passes that test is crazy." I didn't understand half of it, and I ended up being number 3 after passing that test. And I thought, well, she looked at me and she goes, "Well, you're crazy. You passed that test." And so there was a turnover with the department at that time. They had brought in an outside chief, and then they were kind of looking at bringing over a restructuring of the department, calling it safety services. And so I got passed up, and so which I was okay with, because my goal at that time was, I was shooting to be a detective. I really wanted to be a detective. And I had volunteered to go from 2nd shift to 3rd shift because, I wanted to see more action on 3rd shift. And I really enjoyed my time on 3rd shift. I thought it would be a couple of years, and it ended up being 8. So long story short, they did away with the reorganization, and Chief Williams became the chief. And I remember him pulling me in and saying, "Well, you're going this time, you're getting picked." And I thought, okay. And so I just got back to 2nd shift, and I got promoted to sergeant, and I got sent back to 3rd shift. And I thought, well, I'm stuck here again. And had a great career, and I was also on the SWAT team for a grand total out of my almost 3 decades, for 15 years. during the SWAT team time, they were reorganizing and they were picking 10 people, and I was number 11. And I remember going to Chief Williams and saying, what did I do wrong? What can I improve on? And all this. And he told me, and one of the individuals had not passed the process, so I got the call to be on that. And long story short on that, I ended up becoming the second commander of that SWAT team as the years progressed. And that team built from 10 guys to over 30, with 20 guys that were in charge of assaults and drug raids and hostage situations, and then over 10 or 11 negotiators, in which Ray was one of the negotiators on that team as well. But that was one of my fondest spots. And in 1991, so I had a lot of stress on me too, and when I first made sergeant, because I was only 27 years old. And they had the Todd rule after that. You only had to have, I think it was a couple years on to take the test. And after I had passed the test and got on the list, they moved that to 7 years. So that was the Todd rule, so nobody that young could ever take that sergeant's test again. But there was a lot of stress, and I had to prove myself as a very, very young sergeant. And I had no detective experience whatsoever. And but that was one of the best times I had in my career, was being a patrol sergeant, and it was on second and third shift. And just when I made sergeant too in Decatur at that time, there was a big influence of gang violence in the city of Decatur in the early 90s with the Gangster Disciples and the Vice Lords and some other gangs. And there was a tremendous amount, cocaine was coming into the city, and so there was a tremendous amount of gun violence, and sergeants always had to go to that. But then in 1991, or I'm sorry, I made sergeant in 1991. In 1995, I'd only been a sergeant for 4 years. And Mike Mullen was the chief of police at that time, with Mark Bartholomew and Rich Ryan as under chiefs or deputy chiefs. I think they were called lieutenants or commanders at that time. We were told to put in for lieutenant, and I don't really want to be a lieutenant. My goal when I hired on at the police department was to finish up as a sergeant. And 1995, I made lieutenant and was one of a new lieutenant, and it just progressed from there on. It went from a lieutenant in patrol. I worked on patrol in third shift and second shift, and then I got sent to the detective bureau and was a lieutenant. And those guys were hard, man. They were much older than me. They'd seen a lot of things, and I thought, how is this going to work out? And that turned out to be yet another highlight of my career. We solved a ton of homicides in the city at that time, but we were also going back. One of our biggest accomplishments I had at that time was we went back and solved a lot of cold cases, some big cold cases. I don't know if anybody remembers like the Halloween murders that occurred at that time. The Hall Gordon Halloween murders, we solved that one. There was a little girl in town that was abducted out of her trailer, that was murdered and found out and actually close to the county line. Sarah Kramer, we solved that one, and we at that time I think we took on 30 cold cases and we solved 29. And out of the homicides that we had at that time, we had 131 homicides during my tenure, and we solved 128. So we had a really good track record. And I had great guys in patrol and gals in patrol. I had great guys in the detective bureau and great gals in the detective bureau. And I worked under Mark Bartholomew at that time, who was the commander of the detective bureau. Mark was my sergeant. As he moved up, it seemed like I was moving up. And he gave me free rein to really work those cases. And I think one of the things that I think helped me in my career was when I made sergeant or I made lieutenant, I just didn't sit in the patrol car. I didn't sit in the office. I was right out there with them the whole time. It didn't matter if it was 4 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I was out there with them. And even with the emergency response team that I was put on, as I moved up in rank, I was still number one in the door. You know, I didn't want to let those guys, really, probably until my son was born, I was okay with moving back to like number 4 or 5 in the door. But I was with those guys, and I think they respected that, and I was able to earn their trust and respect over the years. Then in I spent a lot of time in the detective bureau, and then I was sent to the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, following Chief Williams' path. Mark Barthélemy, Mike Mullen, Rich Ryan, Mike Buckley, all those guys were going to the FBI Academy, so I got sent to that. And when I came back, they had restructured, Mark was the chief, they had restructured things, and then I was called a commander, and I was bounced back and forth between patrol and investigations. And then they changed that to deputy chief. And I was in deputy chief, both patrol and commander. And one of the things I did in patrol was, kept seeming like I kept getting pushed back to third shift. I kind of took that as a message, like, man, maybe they're not happy with this, promotion here. I keep getting bounced back to third shift, but we had good luck, and I had great people working for me. And then in, I think it was 2010, Jim Anderson, who was the chief at that time, and that I'd worked with my whole career, he retired, and I was made acting chief, and I stayed until 2014. I had a great career. I really wish I would have kept notes and maybe wrote a book or something like that. There's stories I wouldn't want to publish. There's stories that would have been funny. I met great people along the way. I had a great career. Like I said, I got to experience SWAT operations for 14 years, patrol operations for 14 years, or for numerous years, and then moved up into the command ranks. And man, I really loved it. And people will ask you today, well, do you miss it? Well, everybody usually says, well, I miss the people. I miss the people and I miss the work, because I felt like I had a purpose. Now, in today's times, in today's world, I don't think I'd want to be there. I'd probably be fired because I wouldn't keep my mouth shut and stuff. But and especially with staffing and all that stuff, when I left, we had 166 officers. Today, they're running 128 to 130s. I would blow a gasket. So my wife would tell you, it's like I probably wouldn't survive. But man, I had great experiences. I had lots of stories. Mark's not here today. He's dealing with some health issues. And he said, well, don't tell the story. And I said, well, I won't tell that one. But I remember being a patrolman, and Mark Barthélemy. I was involved in a car chase, and Mark was my sergeant. Man, I was chasing a guy that was wanted for armed robbery. And we went through all sorts of neighborhoods, and Mark got in front of me. And he ended up hitting chain link fences and garbage cans and privacy fences and all sorts of things. And I couldn't see in the alley, and the dust was going everywhere. And after we caught the guy, Mark looks at me and goes, do the report. And I'm like, well, you were the one that hit everything. Why am I having to do the report? But he took care of me during my career, and I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from a lot of command officers, John Mickler, Rich Ryan, Roy Glick, Chief Williams, Mark. They were just, that's who I molded my career from. And I had a good career. I woke up, I never knew when would be the right time to retire. And I asked Mark, how did you know when it was the right time? He said, you'll know. And you can ask my wife, who's here with us today. I wanted to get my 30 in. And I was about a month away from my 29th year. And I woke up in the middle of the morning, and I told her, I said, it's time. It's just, I'm done. And as Chief Williams will tell you, I wanted to hug a criminal when I left, because as a chief, you deal with a lot of personnel issues. And even as chief, I would go out on the street with those guys at midnight or second shift and stuff. I really wanted to do that. But the personnel issues sometimes, and it was always like 10 guys. It was never the whole department. It was the same 10. I always called them my most wanted list, and it was just like it wore me out. And but I enjoyed it. I loved every minute of it. I wouldn't change a thing. I was a young intern. I was a young sergeant, young lieutenant, all the way on up. But there was other things all in between that really, I think, defined my career. But the most important was the people that I met, the friendships that I developed over life. And I never got involved with politics. We had a great relationship with the sheriff's office. I met great people with him, Ed, Jerry, Roger, several other people. It was a blast. That was all I ever wanted to do as a kid. And I did test with the state police, and I passed I had a 90 on my written test, and they said that wasn't enough at that time for a male. You had to have a higher score as a male, which worked out good. And then 10 years later, I got a note that there was a class action lawsuit, and I thought, well, I'm already vested here. I'm not leaving. And I'm glad I didn't, because I'm proud of Decatur PD. They were some of the hardest working guys that ever worked there, the people and gals and guys. They were probably the most underpaid compared to most of the cities around in the state of Illinois, and yet they were probably the most effective and hardworking people that I'd ever met in my life. And when it was all said and done, I was glad to leave them, or be with that agency and everything. So I thought you were going to ask questions here instead. I don't know where to start, but it was fantastic. I owe my career, obviously, to Chief Williams, to Mark Barthelemy, Rich Ryan. I learned a lot from, I thought John Mickrell was probably one of the most professional officers I'd ever witnessed. I was always afraid of him and stuff, because he was the boss and everything. I had great guys. When I first started, I will tell this story. You know, you're not supposed to, I guess, tell stories, but on my first day as a patrol officer, you know, you go in and you're not allowed to sit down in the squad room because the old guys had their chairs, and so we're sitting in the back. And they brought us equipment, so we had to strip our gun belts down and put on new equipment and everything. So I get assigned to a guy, because my FTO at that time was off, so I got assigned to a guy by the name of Kenny Dahlman, who ended up becoming one of my best friends. And we lived next door to him over the years and stuff. And then there was 5 of us that were hired on. Another officer that was hired on was Tommy Butts Jr., who has since passed away. And Tommy was assigned to Steve Shabak. So the first half of our shift there was absolutely nothing going on. And Kenny chewed tobacco at that time, and I chewed tobacco at the time. So all we were doing was sitting in a parking lot, spitting out skull juice out the window down the side of the squad car. And he dropped me off for dinner. We got a dinner break. And then all of a sudden there was a laundromat at Main and Green that got an alarm. And Kenny always said, about 90% of these alarms are false. So we pull up to this laundromat, and he's telling me how you should approach it and all that. And he kept pawning everything off. Your FTOs will tell you how you do this. So me and Tommy Butts are on one end of the building, while Kenny and Steve Shabak are on the other end of the building. They're probably talking about how they drew these guys that are knuckleheads and all this stuff as recruits. And all of a sudden I hear this noise inside the building. And, you know, we didn't get told how to talk on the radio or anything like that. The next thing I hear is crashing. And a foot's coming out the side of this laundromat. And it's like, I'm trying to yell. Me and Tommy were talking about how our night was going so far. I'm trying to yell at those guys because I was told, don't talk on the radio unless we give you permission that night. And I'm thinking, hey, I'm yelling, hey, there's a foot coming out. And this guy was the worst burglar on the planet. He's kicking, he's got his feet out, he's making all this noise. And me and Tommy are backing up. We didn't know if we were allowed to pull our weapon out. We didn't know if we could grab him. And the next thing I know, this guy gets out and he runs. And we're yelling at Kenny and Steve Shabak like, hey, you know, there's the burglar. And to this day, that haunts me because we didn't catch him. I have no idea who it was. And I thought, my God. And we went in and we had to learn to type that night, reports. And they had these old typewriters and Band-Aids were wrapped around some of the keys because the keys were missing. And we're typing. And it's like all these other hard guys. Well, that was a great job, rookie. Let the burglars go, you know. And it's like me and Tommy Butts are looking at each other like, we're not going to make it. We're just not going to make it, man. And to this day, I have no idea who that individual was. But every time I see Kenny and Steve, they go, we'll give you permission to talk on the radio so you can catch these guys. But now we're all old and bald and fat. But I have so many stories like that over the years. It was a great job. It fed my family. I was proud to do that for a living. As I rose up, I felt like I had a purpose, you know, and made a good name for ourselves and had a good career. There was a lot of downturn, or a lot of low points in that career as well. As I moved up in rank, there was officers that we had to arrest that had committed some crimes. And having to testify against an officer was one of the, when I signed up, I never thought that was going to have to be the thing. But that happened, unfortunately, with one individual over the years. But other than that, man, I wouldn't change it a bit. I wanted to be a game warden, but I'm glad I didn't become a game warden and stuff. And I'm very proud to have been part of the Decatur Police Department. So, I guess that's all I have. If there's no questions or anything. So.
I'd just like to make a comment, because after I retired, I got on the Decatur City Council. Todd was the chief, and the city was just not in good shape financially. We were trying to get them money for more officers, but long story short, their budget was really tight, overtime, everything. But, Illinois Department of Transportation periodically gives money back to police agencies to, it may be like you're gonna go out and find seatbelt violations or impaired drivers. So Todd and some of the guys didn't like this, but I thought, man, this is a common sense chief of police. So the IDOT was, okay, this is a seatbelt enforcement thing, and you have to have like so many tickets and there's stipulations. So they were having all kinds of trouble in a certain area of town. Didn't have the resources to put extra people in there. So he tells these guys when they sign up for this hire back, which is great money, he says, all right, well, you're gonna look for seatbelt violations, but you're gonna look from North El Dorado, west of Lee, and he basically said, you're gonna stay in this area, you're not leaving. Well, these guys were used to going out, you knew you weren't gonna get all those details. And he said, you're gonna concentrate this area. And I just thought, now here's the chief that gets it. You can't give him the money that he really needs, so he's gonna let the state pay for it, but then he's gonna have all these extra officers looking for seatbelt violations, but they're also looking for a lot of other things in this neighborhood too. And I just, there's so many chiefs that just wouldn't have done that just because there's nothing really wrong with it, but it just, you solve the problem without having to cough up more money. And I always appreciate that as a councilman, that you had the foresight to do that. But I'll also say when I was a sheriff, Todd already touched on it, there was no animosity. We got along great. You short a little ammo, take ours, pay us back. I mean, Todd was just a great chief to work with.
I appreciate that. I learned that concept actually through Rich Ryan and Mike Mullen, who was the chief of police. They called me one time and said, we're going to have a rat pack. We want you to plan it. And I didn't even know what it was. But it was basically what they call today proactive patrols, concentrated enforcements. And you went into the areas where you knew, quote, the bad guys were at. And we had good luck. We took a lot of guns off the street, a lot of drugs off the street. My thing is I was taught, though, you don't have to be hard with people until they were hard with you. And that was something I expected from the officers as well. But we had that, and I was fortunate to get to plan a lot of big events. Those rat packs, we had the tornadoes in the 90s. I just made lieutenant. I remember Mike Mullen as the chief of police coming up and saying, give a briefing to the governor. And it's like, and the governor was asking, well, what's the devastation of the range of the tornado? And I wanted to say, well, I just got here 5 minutes ago. I don't know. But it was bad. I felt like Donald Trump. It was bad, bad. But it just, I got to experience a lot of things. And I always loved the operational aspects. And I think that's, as I moved up in my career and stuff like that, I always went back to where it started, back out on the streets. And we had great prosecutors too at that time. I think today things are out of whack, but we had great people. We had Jack Ahola and Richard Current and Jay Scott. Those guys, we worked with them hand in hand, man, and they were family. If we had big things, we could call them ask questions about it, and I know Jack's here. I'm not saying that because Jack was here. I've talked highly of Jack and Richard and Jay any chance I had, because they always supported us and helped us with that type of stuff. And I had a great council when I was chief too. You know, that was a big deal. I had people that supported the police, and I think that's important no matter what era you're in, and I certainly did. And I had a great mayor at the time, Mike McElroy. Paul Osborne was another mayor that I got to work for, who was in my corner and stuff, and Terry Howley. You know, I was able to have a good career because they allowed us to do what we had to do and have, you know, take care of business, be respectful, be professional, and get it done. And we would answer to them, and they would have our back. So, and I met a lot of great people in the fire department. You know, my son, who is now 31, is a fireman in Peoria. He's been a fireman for 8 years. I think he was smart. It was kind of right up his alley to sleep and get paid. So no, but I'm kind of glad he went into that line of work. And I gotta say this publicly, because 7 months ago I became a grandpa, and man, I didn't know how that would be, how I would handle being called grandpa. And he can't say grandpa yet, but I love it. And so I wanted to make that clear. So thank you anyway. So go ahead, Mark. Thank you. I'm afraid to answer. Yeah. Sure. Yep. Foot patrols were something that, and I want to give credit where credit's due. Mark Barthelme had brought that up when he was chief, and it kind of went away after the chief, after him. And then when I came back, I really thought, man, it wasn't walking down the street swinging a nightstick. It was actually engaging with people that were in your area, in your district, and you know, it really had an impact at first. You know, and that led to other things. Foot patrol led to bike patrols, and I kind of thought that was a goofy idea at the first time. Man, cops don't ride bicycles, you know, we need to be out there chasing the bad guy. But that was really, those guys caught a tremendous amount of people because the bad guys didn't see them coming on bicycles. But they were able to spend time in the neighborhoods, spend time in the community, develop a relationship, identify information and sources, people that they developed trust with. And so foot patrols and bike patrols, and we did it all over the place when I got in there. But we kept the term proactive patrol, replaced rat packs. I don't know where that term came from, but you know, it was just an aggressive patrol, and you would really shut down those bad areas and stuff. But I appreciate the question, Mark. That really was started at a mark. It kind of faded, and then when I got to be chief, it was brought back into play because, and honestly, I was worried that the officers wouldn't receive it well. They really did, because it gave them a break. It got them out of the squad car. They were able to walk. Guys like being on the bicycles, man. They get some exercise, and it was really good, especially in big crowd patrol areas like the celebration, or we had the boat patrol, or the boat races, and the fair and all that. Those guys could get around a lot quicker on bikes and on foot than they could, obviously, in a squad car. And it just developed better relationships when we would get better trust with the community, and we would get more information, which had a ripple effect for the entire department. So it gave you a good reputation, but it would develop information for detectives on certain cases that they had. Or, you would get information about wanted individuals that were wanted for crimes. You know, a lot of people back then wouldn't tell you, but that developed those relationships to where you would get that. So I would like to say I took credit for that, but I didn't. Mark started that. And then it kind of faded after him, and then I brought it back. I was maybe a little bit more aggressive with those proactive patrols and stuff, and I really felt that was important to go in there and target wanted individuals in those high crime areas so that the people that did live there would know that we hadn't forgotten him. We were going in to do the job and stuff. But yeah, I appreciate the question. But, yep.
I have a quick question. Thank you for the kind words about me, Jack Hoffman. I retired in 2012, and I've been watching across the country some of the aberrations that have taken place in other counties, other cities in this nation of ours. And I'm very disappointed in many prosecutors across the country how they're acting and allowing crime to take off, and there don't seem to be any consequences. We're blessed to have our next state's attorney here, Diane Corey. And I'm sure she would appreciate any advice Jerry Dawson or any of the chiefs up there can say what is the importance of the state's attorney's office relation with the police department and the sheriff's office.
Well, I think the relationship is hugely important. I mean, it does no good to go and do what we did if they're just going to turn around and be let back out. I think the laws are there. I don't understand in today's times why they're not following through on that. And I mean, if they would just adhere to the laws that were there. I mean, if you were building burnings in our city or anything like that, that wasn't going to be allowed to go on, whether it was with the sheriff or with us or the state police. That just, no matter who the chief was that I grew up, and I think even the guys that are in charge now, that was never going to be allowed. I think they just want, the plea deals we get, the relationships are important. Obviously, the police have to do their part, make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And sometimes that didn't happen, so that tied your hands and stuff. But I think the politics of the world, and the way the world's going right now, I think people want people held accountable. That's all they're asking for is accountability and stuff. They're not asking for anything higher or lower than that. They just want accountability. But this second, third, fourth chances, I don't want to get into politics. That's why I would not be the chief of police today, because I'd blow a gasket. Jerry would tell you, and my wife would tell you, and all that. I'd probably have to have a pacemaker put in. But they just want people held accountable for some of these crimes. And if not, you're just going to continue to feed the cycle. So I hope that the next state's attorney, and I believe she will, from what I know, I have no doubt that that will be a focus and an emphasis in the state's attorney's office. So you have my vote. But, can I talk too much? Is it time? I don't know. Yeah. I'm sorry. Ed called. Come on up, Ed. Get the hot seat. Oh, I want to recognize students. I mentioned Greg Parsons is here. Craig he was a super guy with the police department. John Nicholas here. I mentioned him, but and just, I want to say thanks, because Greg was a great guy, and then he went on to be with DCFS as an investigator and was a top-notch investigator with DCFS. So, and was a good friend too. So it's nice to see him today here. So, come on up, Ed. Thank you, Chief.
I knew this was going to happen, Chief. I would have dressed up a little bit more. I wasn't going to miss this. As I made clear earlier, I'm a big fan of Jerry Dawson, not because of his leadership at the Sheriff's Office as much as just a great friend. So I think it's big to see friends. But walking in the door, it made my day to see Jack Ahola sitting with our next state's attorney, Diane Corey. Because in my book, I work for several sheriffs, but I also work cases with several prosecutors. And Jack was by far the best prosecutor we ever had in my career. And I met Diane as a young prosecutor when she first started her career. I knew her family for years, but I thought years back, talking to Sheriff Dawson, I said, we gotta get these two together. And lo and behold, I walk in tonight and there they are. I want to thank you for many things, Chief. Started in 1991, it was Lieutenant Williams in charge of investigations, Sergeant Meckler with with juvenile, Greg Parsons with DCFS, Todd Walker was a sergeant in patrol, I believe, and Skip Berniking, he was in the hallway. No, seriously, I was very fortunate when I came on the sheriff's office. We were all in the same building downtown. And over time, and Todd had to conquer this as well, and the statutes in retaining evidence, they literally outgrew it. But that was so nice to have that because all of you were mentors to me. I would go into Todd's office and vent, once a week probably, and once a day. And we would talk through things. Mike Beck and I literally solved 2 linking sexual assault cases talking in the hallway. And that was just talking. That was the communication. We both had the same type of crime. And we immediately went down and ran it by then Lieutenant Mickler. And we cleared that up by just a conversation. And I wish we had that still, but I understood what they had to do, and it's a beautiful facility out there. I had a wonderful career. I served in the Marine Corps, and I knew immediately I wanted to come home. And lo and behold, I had a very big, gruff sergeant when I hired on the jail, Jerry Dawson. Been my mentor and my friend ever since. And I think Todd mentioned a bit earlier, latitude the command officers gave him. And I thank you for that, because Jerry would always give me latitude to work my cases. And we would have the occasional phone call where he'd call me and say, "You did what?" And he would take care of it, but he gave me latitude as well. And I always had his support. And so when I became in their positions, in juvenile and investigations, I tried to follow their lead. And I want to thank you gentlemen and ladies that are in this room that meant so much to me in my career, because we helped our community. And I hope the new officers coming on have that. I teach at the academy now. I'm on my 24th law enforcement class. They will be fine. They need to learn their way of policing. When I came on in 1990, I was the new generation. I found my way. So we've got to be hopeful that they find their way as well. But I'm hurt in a way, or I'm sorry, sad that Chief Barthelmy wasn't here. He was always one of my favorite people. He always smiled. When Todd would yell at me, Chief Barthelmy would smile. So it was a nice contrast. But Chief Barthelmy would always talk to his new recruits, and you guys need to help me over here. But he mentioned something about tarnishing the badge. The shiny badge, the collar brass that you wear, never tarnish it by yourself or somebody else. And I think that's very important for me to key on, because every class I've had, 24 classes, they have a final inspection with me. And if you know my background, I'm not very easy on those inspections. I still believe in uniform presence, command presence. And I give them a speech, every platoon, before they walk across the stage. Never let anyone, including yourself, tarnish what you built. Because we're part of society, and I want to thank these men and women that came here today to share their stories, because they meant so much to me, and that's all I have. Thank you. It's great seeing everybody. Diane, I'm excited for you. She is a breath of fresh air, folks, and we're very lucky to have her. Jack, it's great to see you out. Thank you, Chief.
I guess it's my turn. My name is Jim Williams. I joined the Decatur Police Department after I got out of the Army in 1970, that long ago. And started as a patrol officer. When I was a young patrol officer, we had a deputy chief by the name of Horace Hoff, very personable guy, for those of you that knew him. And he called me up to his office one day, and he said, "Kid, I want you to go with Gordon Bell, who was a detective at the time. Nobody knows you, you're new." And I'm like, "Okay." He says, "I want you to go home and change and come back in. And you're going to go with Gordon Bell." And I said, "Oh, okay. Can I ask what we're going to do?" Well, there was a place on Railroad Avenue. for those of you that remember back then. And Railroad Avenue had a house of prostitution there. So I was to go in there, and they told us what to do legally. And Virgil Stoltz was a sergeant, and Virgil was to bring a group of guys and then come in the door about 5 minutes afterwards. That way, you know, they were our backup. So I went home. My wife Sharon says, "What are you doing home?" I said, "Changing clothes." And she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go to this house of prostitution." And she says, "Okay." That was my very first arrest. And if you know, those of you that knew Virgil Stoltz, he went to the wrong house. So I'm upstairs with this lady, and she's saying, "Aren't you going to take off your clothes?" And I'm like, "How do I get out of this?" I wasn't going to take off my clothes. And all of a sudden, they finally walked in the right house. And that was my very first arrest. And that began a long career with the Decatur Police Department. And I worked third shift for almost 7 years. And had some of the best times and some of the roughest times back then. Also, I had some unique assignments. I was on the street one night, and I was in an early car, so I went in service early. And they told me to 10:25, bring in your equipment. That means come back inside with your stuff. And I thought, oh God, okay, I haven't done anything wrong, at least that I know of. So I go in, and there was a sergeant by the name of Sergeant Durr, a very personal guy also. And he says, "Dispatcher called in sick, you're gonna work the radio." So I'm like, okay, but I've never worked the radio before. And he says, "Go in and work the radio." So I go in and sit down, and Jerry Hunk was in there also, and Jerry Hunk said, "Look, I know nothing about the fire department. I don't know how to dispatch fire trucks, so you're sitting on the fire side, and we dispatched police cars and fire trucks back then, and you got me, I got the fire side." And I said, "Well, why do I get the fire side?" He said, "Because back then I had a captain uncle who was on the fire department." And I said, "Okay." So there was a little booklet that told you how to give the difference between still alarm and first alarm. So I started memorizing that. And that was my first night on the radio. But there was this young little kid. He was an Explorer Scout, and he kept coming by all the time. And he's a decent kid. And sometimes he'd sit in the radio room. Of course, the days of computers, that didn't exist. When a call would come in, you get a blue card, you write the address where the nature was, and hand it to the dispatcher. The dispatcher would look up at the card, at the map, and you had to know the addresses where they were. You had to know what district it was, and then you just call in your car and assign it. It's changed a lot since then. And this kid would hang around, and on real quiet nights, he would hang around, and a few times when I had to work the radio on the police side, he would sit there and say, "Well, I'm going to go to the bathroom. Anybody answer him." And he's like, okay. And he didn't do too bad a job. And then later on, he became a Explorer Scout, and then he became an auxiliary. And then he joined the police department, and that young kid was Mark Bartholomew. And he kind of followed me later on in our careers. But anyway, I worked third shift for a while, and I can relate what Todd was talking about, because then I went to juvenile as a juvenile officer, and we investigated crimes where juveniles were either the victim or the perpetrator of the crimes. And did that for a while, then I got promoted to sergeant. uniform sergeant, second shift, and did that for a while. Then I got sent to the detective bureau where I was in charge of the second shift detective bureau. And Mark was working there, Pittenger. A lot of the guys that I worked with were on second shift. And we handled quite a few things from bad checks. We did bad checks back then, all the way through murders. And I'm glad that Todd brought up Paul Gordon, because we solved a lot of crimes, but there were some that just we couldn't solve, that just kind of ate at you. If you remember T.J. Davidson, Paul Gordon was the little girls with the Halloween. And I was so pleased when I heard that using new technology, Todd and his people put that case together. We worked that tremendously, but just couldn't quite put it together. Of course, back then, DNA didn't exist. The best you could do is maybe get a type on a blood or something like that, but they'd say, it's a type A or type B, and there was thousands of people that way, not DNA like you have today. And they did a lot of good work with that. Then I got promoted again and became a lieutenant. And I was a lieutenant on second shift. And a few of you were on the shift with me, and those are good memories. A few bad ones, but mostly good ones. And then I got promoted again, or reassigned at that time, to the detective bureau on day shift, in charge of all the detective bureau. I had the detective bureau, the juvenile officers, the task force, which we had at the time, the crime prevention officers, and crime analysis. And after a while, as Todd was describing, we had let's say, a modification of the police department. We became a division of the department. We were safety services, no longer what we considered a two police department. And those were some pretty rough times we went through. And that city manager left. Well, I went back up a little bit. I was promoted then to chief. And I was chief from 91 to 96. And during that time, there were a few little things happen. As Todd was describing, one day I got a call that we had some damage on the south side of town. I said, well, how bad is it? And the shift commander said, well, we have cars going to the scene now. And we'd have things happen from time to time, and limbs down and things like that. Then they called me back and said, we got quite a bit of damage down there. So I went down there, and around 16th and Cantrell, Belmont, all those streets down there, the tornado had gone through there and caused quite a bit of damage. And so we caught the command post set up there at Eisenhower High School, and I went back to bed about 10 o'clock the next morning, and got a few hours sleep and went back out. And a young officer by the name of Slade, Dave Slade, was out there. And we're getting alerts all of a sudden about another line of storms coming in from Sangamon County. Dave Slade looked at me and said, wouldn't it be hilarious if we had another line of storms come by and cause another tornado? And I just looked at him and said, don't even joke about that. Well, about 10 minutes later, we get a thing from the state saying there's a line of storms coming through. And I stood there in the parking lot at Eisenhower High School and saw this big cloud rotating. And I thought, oh my God. I thought it was really going through downtown. But it went through Home Park, crossed Home Park, just north of St. Teresa and on out. And unfortunately, there was if I recall correctly, there was a fatality out by Harristown somewhere. There was one out there. But we were lucky we didn't have any. So we had 2 tornadoes within 24 hours. When we had the first tornado, we went to 12-hour shifts. Now remember, during this, we're still responding to calls for service. We're still responding to the family fights and all that kind of stuff. So we're standing there, and like, here's the second tornado, and we got another command post now at Oak Grove School. Talk about relationships. This is where relationships, in my opinion, became very, very important. We had a good relationship with the sheriff's office. Years past, yeah, but we had a good relationship then. Captain Holzapfel, who became the sheriff, and there was a young state trooper. And when I was a young patrolman on third shift, lots of times I sat on El Dorado Street running radar, and he'd pull up and he'd, just talk about stuff. And he was a trooper, and he moved on. His name was Dave Morgan, and he became the District 10 State Police Commander. And I turned around, he was standing there, and he says, "What help do you need?" And we said, "We got everybody working 12-hour shifts. We got 2 tornadoes now. Whatever you can give us." And they gave us like about 20 troopers came over here. And that was very, very important to us and to the citizens of Decatur, that relationship we all had worked together. We also had some other interesting issues while I was chief. There was a little minor time when we had 3 unions out on strike at the same time. And that was a little challenging from time to time. And again, Illinois State Police and the Sheriff's Office, we came together and worked as a unit. And I appreciated that very much. We also had another tornado in 1974 when I was a young patrolman that went through Shadow Lane. And I remember getting a call to go out to that. And that was my first experience with a tornado. But probably one of the most memorable was I was in bed, lived in South Shores at the time, and I heard this big boom. And I thought, I got out of bed, my wife, she says, "What was that?" And I said, "I don't know, I thought it was lightning or something, or thunder." And I looked out the window, nothing. Went back to bed, and about an hour or 2 later, the phone rang. It says, "Get your equipment and get to headquarters. We've had a rail explosion out in the rail yards." That was in 74. And that was quite an experience going out there. And when we left headquarters in a little caravan going out there, and we got around 22nd Street, and it looked like a war zone. There was windows blown out, buildings blown up to pieces. It was quite a mess. So I was a young patrolman at the time, and they put me on a corner out east and said, "Don't let anybody come in this area." I said, "Okay." About 4 or 5 hours later, a group, Salvation Army, came by and said, "Would you like something to eat?" And I said, "Yeah, I was standing." This is July. It was hot. And I said, "Sure, I'd love to have something to eat." And they gave me a bologna sandwich. I took a couple of bites of that bologna sandwich, and I thought, boy, this don't taste right. I've never been so sick in all my life. But that was some of the rough experience, interesting experiences, I guess you'd call it. I worked with some very nice people, some wonderful people. The things have changed so much over the years. When I started as a patrol officer, if you got out of that squad car chasing somebody, you were on your own. We had 2 little lights on the radio of the squad car, a red one and a green one. And when you got out of that car and took off, nobody was around. You didn't have any radios. Nobody knew where you were at. The best you could do would be to give a description of who you're after and the direction of travel. And then you wait for your buddies to show up. And the buddy could be a deputy, could be another police officer. And that was very, very, very important that you had that camaraderie together back then. Now they've got radios and all kinds of stuff, but back then you were on your own. In fact, I was chasing a juvenile through a yard one day, about 3 or 4 in the morning, and ran into a clothesline. I still got the scar to prove it right here. that relationship was very, very important. I was running radar one night on third shift and on Monroe Street, and a car went zooming by, and I ended up chasing that guy up almost to the Warrensburg Forsyth Blacktop. And I knew the roads up there because we lived in that area back then when I was a kid. And this guy wrecked his car because he came to a T and he didn't make the T. And he's sitting in his car all wrecked, and I'm out in the middle of nowhere by myself. And everybody's trying to figure out where I'm at. And I looked up and saw some red lights coming. And I thought, well, good, at least some buddies are coming. And who it ended up being was the Illinois State Trooper who had heard this on the radio, and he come up, and his name was Tom Cooley. And I will never, ever forget that. He ended up being a lieutenant with the sheriff's, with the state police. But we worked together. We worked a lot of good things together. We worked a lot of bad things together. Worked a lot of major crimes. When I was a juvenile, in juvenile, we worked some bad juvenile issues. It was very, very rewarding, as the sheriff was saying, when you could put somebody in jail and get them off the street with a major crime that had occurred. And we had a lot of those, but again, it gets a little disturbing when you can't put it together. But it was nice that other officers can follow up and use the technology we have today on crimes that occurred in the past to put those together. That was very nice. I had a young patrolman. I was one of the first FTOs, field training officers. Back then, they actually sent us to school when we became field training officers, and I had a young patrolman with me one night. And back then, we had to wear our hats and things like this, and we were out on about, and we had another officer calling for help. And we went on West Green Street, and just when we arrived, this officer was fighting with the suspect, and we bailed out of the car, got up there, and the officer was using what they called mace at the time. And I got a little too close and got a face full of mace. And this young officer was standing there making sure he had his hat on and everything, he was looking good. And I said, "You're going to have to drive on the way back because I can't see." And he did a decent job. His name was Mickler, and he's sitting over here right now. And that was, yeah, you look good. You look good. I mean, when Larry Gregg and I looked up with, mace all over us, and we had this guy in handcuffs, and there's nothing more fun than trying to put a handcuffs on a guy that's resisting. But you look good. You really look good standing there with your hat on. But I'll just kidding aside, worked with John for quite a while, and but we had a lot of good times and things. Like I said, the technology has improved tremendously, and it's mainly for the betterment of the officers. When we were on the street, there was no such thing as body armor. It just didn't exist. I mean, this was your body armor, your shirt. And unfortunately, we had a few officers get injured pretty bad. I was very lucky we didn't lose any during my tenure, but we had quite a few get hurt pretty bad. But again, there's as I look back, there's a lot of things that happened. Maybe you changed it a little bit, but all in all, there were some great people, some great officers, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Speaking about the state's attorney's office, they are the complement to the end of our work. Without the state's attorney's office, and the state's attorney's office that supports you, everything you do is for nothing. It's for naught. And I worked under several state's attorney, Basil Granius, anybody remembers back that far. He always had a cigarette, and you'd stand there and look and see how long does it take before those ashes fall off? I said, and he was constantly like this. But he supported us, and we supported him. Then we had a few in between. And then Larry Fichter towards the end of my career. And Larry was Larry. But again, you had to work with the state's attorney. You had to have a good state's attorney's office because sometimes you want a warrant in the middle of the night and you couldn't wait. You had to do it just then. Sometimes you had very important legal questions and you needed good legal advice. Anybody remember Momentous? Yeah, Momentous. We had a call on day shift one day to the area of 22nd Street, roughly, and one of our day shift patrolmen went out there, and it was getting close to shift time, and there was I'll call it a nosy old lady who said somebody was putting garbage in their dumpster. And that's just isn't right. They got to do something about that. So the patrolman thought, okay, it's getting close to time to go home. So I'll stick around here for a while. I'll look in the dumpster like I'm doing something, and then I'll leave. So he opens the dumpster and he looks in there, and there's some bags, black bags. And he thought, well, maybe if I open these bags, there'll be some names in there. I'll figure out who's threw this garbage in the dumpster. And it ended up being, I think it was a leg. And we started looking around at other dumpsters up and down the road, and we found pieces parts of this person. Never did find the head, but we found these pieces parts. And his name, later on found out his name was Mo. So, yeah. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because of the work of the state's attorney's office, because we had this was a big media thing at the time. And we got a few leads, and we got a lead one day about there was a lady who had a van, and one of the descriptions was a van was seen in this area, and that her husband hadn't been seen around for a while. And they'd seen on the radio, and then on TV, heard on the radio, and seen on the TV about these body parts we'd found. So I sent a detective, I was in charge of the detective bureau, and I sent a detective to go see this woman. It was in another city, expecting to go over there. Yeah, there's a reason why the husband's not around. It'd be all over with, and he'd drive back, and that'd be the end of it. And I'm sitting there and get this phone call from the detective, and I go, yeah, what'd you find? The detective says, it was her husband. And I'm like, what? He says, yeah, it's her husband. I said, you're talking about the body parts was her husband? He said, yep. She told me that she killed him. She cut him up and brought him over to Decatur and threw him in the lake and other places. And I thought, okay. Well, there's this, lawyers can explain this to you. There's a little thing called Miranda. And you're supposed to, tell them about all these rights you got and all that stuff. I said, did you Miranda? No, we were just sitting here at the table and she just started talking. I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do? And my first reaction was to say, okay, we're going to surround this house. We'll get a search warrant and all that kind of stuff. And there happened to be an assistant state's attorney sitting there because we discussed this case earlier. He said, leave. And I said, what? He said, leave, just leave. Tell the detective to leave. And I said, okay, so we'll surround the house. No, don't surround the house, just leave. And I'm like, okay. So I said to the detective, leave. And he goes, okay. She confessed to me to killing her husband. I said, yeah, I know. and you want me to leave? I said, yeah, just leave. So he left and came back, and we waited exactly 24 hours, got an arrest warrant and a search warrant, and we went over there because there were two parts about Miranda. Custody was part of that. And because we left, it wasn't considered custody. She was convicted and went to prison. This went to the appellate court. And because of the advice of the state's attorney's office, that was upheld. And justice was served, let's say it that way. But that shows you an example of how important that relationship is with the state's attorney's office. Had we have done what that stupid lieutenant said to do, which was maybe, okay, advise her rights again, and we'll start this whole thing over again, it would end up completely different. But we were just lucky to have that assistant state's attorney sitting there saying, just leave. And it was the best thing we did. And that was one of the examples of that relationship between us and the state's attorney's office. Now, back then when I was working with them, as I said, the state's attorney, but we had Richard Current, we had a lot of good people, Jack, a lot of people that they would come over and sit down and have a cup of coffee and just talk about stuff. And that was a very important relationship to have. And it served the city of Decatur a lot better and the citizens a lot better. I could go on probably for another couple hours about the crimes that were solved because we worked together. And you kind of, you make your case, put the bow on it, and hand it off to them. And it needs at times that balance between somebody looking at it a little bit different than we look at it. And we had some cases that was very important. We had a case called, the victim was Melody Dove. I don't know if any of you remember that one or not. But she was murdered, taken out southern part of, I think it was in Macon County, they dumped her in a cornfield. He dumped her in a cornfield. And by, again, working with the state's attorney's office, we were able to develop information about where the body was, because we knew what had happened. That's back when luminol was getting to be a brand new thing, and we found the place where the murder occurred. The bad guy tried to clean it up. We went in with luminol and identified the location of the crime scene, and was able to, through work with the state's attorney's office, get enough information. We went down to found her body in the cornfield. But again, that relationship was very, very important. I probably rambled here for a little bit, but if you have any questions or any comments, or yes, Todd.
Chief, I just want to say, first of all, thank you to History of the Heartland for being on to put this together.
Yes, thank you, Ann.
You know, when you come on and when you go through a career like we did, I mean, I saw some of the worst things that the humanity could ever do to other humans. I saw some of the funniest things too in my career. For me personally, there's not a person in this room that didn't have a positive impact on my life. You know, one of the greatest things I think as a human being you have is that you have an impact, a positive impact on other people's lives. And it's great that you and Sharon came up here. I wish I could have told the story about when Sharon and I worked with Crime Stoppers reenactment at a bank, and I got chewed out because I was too rough trying to reenact this thing with the lieutenant's wife at the time. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. Too rough for that. There was a lot of great stories. I wish I could have told my story of when I got put on the fire radio and I thought I was going to lose my job with that. When I told them to tie a rock around the duck's good leg and throw it back in the lake, and you come out of the office like, you can't say that, you know, over the radio. But everybody in this room had a positive impact on my life personally, and it's great It's wonderful to see you and Sharon back up here again. I know you guys have a life in Florida, but everybody in this room means everybody, whether it's fire or police, has had a great impact on my life. And I just want to thank you for your service and what you did. You know, I had several chiefs. I could list off all my chiefs. You were my second chief. I don't count John Race as my chief. I include Pat Vaughn and then you. And Pat Vaughn was actually my god-grandfather. And that's with him, his relationship with my grandfather. I just want to thank you for coming up, giving time, especially after the hurricane and all that stuff that you all went through, coming up and participating in this. And thank you for the impact that you made as a chief and as a city manager. I appreciate the sheriff and Ed and John, Ray, Greg, everybody being here. Jack. Jack had a huge impact on my life, as well as Richard and Jay. I would say that about Larry but I just want to say thank you for coming up here and giving the time. And it's wonderful to see everybody here again today. And I appreciate everything that you did for this community and for this city. So I don't think I would have had the career that I have if I didn't have the role models that I have. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. What Todd was talking about was I was married. Well, we've been married 54 years, but I was married to it. I guess you'd call her an actress. We were involved quite a bit with Crime Stoppers, and my wife was on the board, and I coordinated it many years ago. And we, to generate more activity and more interest, WA&D at the time decided they were going to reenact the crime of the week. Every week there was a crime that occurred, whatever it was. And they would reenact them. And we had some of the, Jeff Larner and some of the guys in the crime prevention unit would be the bad guy, and others would be the bad guy. And my wife was usually the victim. And in fact, there was a situation where you probably remember better than I about somebody at school was saying, yeah, our daughter came home, was talking about, boy, how's your mom doing? She's doing okay. Why? Well, I saw she got beat up on TV last night. But no, we had some, as you said, we had some good times back then. We did. And then in 1996, we had planned on retiring and moving to the Tampa area. My son, who is here, was a Tampa police officer at the time. And to make you feel old, he's now retired from the Tampa Police. But he was a police officer in Tampa. He became a helicopter pilot and flew 407 helicopters down in Tampa in the Tampa Police Department. And I always joke about, well, when you were an officer and you were looking for somebody, how would you identify them? He said, all I just saw was the top of their heads. That's all I could see when they were running around being a helicopter pilot. He is now retired from the Tampa Police Department. But after almost 27 years with the police department, I became the city manager for the city of Decatur. And we postponed our travels to Florida so I could fulfill the obligation I have with the city of Decatur because of the contract. So after 3 years as city manager, almost 30 years with the city, I retired. And we moved to Florida, where we live in Florida now. And Todd's talked about a hurricane that went through our area just a few days ago that is no fun. You can take my word for it. But we survived it. We didn't have very little damage, and we were very, very fortunate considering that. So it really was. Anyone have any questions? How are we doing time-wise? 1 minute.
I should clarify that although I was a probationary officer, I did manage to get my crying FTO, Jim Williams, to headquarters, and when he got done crying, he informed me that I don't have to put my hat on to go help another officer.
Yeah, that Mace was before the days of Oleo Rosa Capsicum, which is basically a little bit stronger. But yeah, it still got your attention back then. Yeah. And I remember Todd.
30 seconds.
I was the one that he's talking about getting promoted to sergeant when he was 27. Back then I had shirts older than that. And,
Still does.
still do. But then I promoted him to sergeant, and there was, let's say, some discussion at the time. But apparently I must have seen something in him that was worth the gamble, for lack of a better word. And as you can tell here, it worked out okay. It worked out. Yes. And like I said, I worked with some very, very nice young officers and ladies. I'm very, very biased, but I think we have one of the best police departments around. We had a good relationship with the sheriff's office, good relationship with the state police. Unfortunately, I don't know if you saw that news, but a state trooper unfortunately was killed yesterday over in Champaign County in a traffic accident.
Corey Thompson.
Yeah. And so when you go home and your family's there, be happy that you were able to go home. There were some that weren't able to go home. So you think about the things that go on in Decatur, now the fact that we live in Tampa. It's a completely different world down there. And I mean, the fatal accidents, shootings and things like that, that's like 15th, 16th page on the paper. There's so many things that are occurring down there. So Decatur's not a bad spot. And people lose track of that sometimes. They think, oh, this is the worst place in the world to live in, all kinds of crime. It's not the case. It's not the case. Yeah, we have challenges, but usually with good people at the police department, the state's attorney's office, the sheriff's office, and with the state troopers, we'll overcome them. We really will. We really do. Any other questions? Not too long ago, I was watching YouTube and was watching one of these presentations about the fire department. And the young man who was involved in that setting here today, and he was telling stories about the fire department and us old-time fire dispatchers can relate to the fire service a little bit. So I'm glad the fire department's represented, although you are retired at this time. Yes. And I was a few times very pleased and happy to sit in my warm squad car while you guys were crawling up on roofs that I could never understand why you're crawling on the roof of a burning building. Well, with water all over you, and I'm sitting here going, well, that must be awful cold out there, doing that with icicles and stuff. And one time I was talking to my uncle, who was a captain, and I said, I don't know how you guys go on top of those roofs and go in those burning buildings. And he said, I hear you guys going to calls for service with a man with a gun, and I don't know how you could do that. And I said, I'd rather do that than crawl on top of some building that's got smoke and stuff coming out of it. No way in the world. But the good thing for those services for the city. And Todd talking about politics. Become a city manager, Todd. The world changes real fast on you. The world changes real fast.
That was gonna be my one question. What's a harder lightning rod to be, chief or manager?
Oh, boy. Probably manager, because when you're the chief, you worried, as Todd was talking about. I think our authorized strength was like 164 officers when I was chief, and you worry about them. It's one of the few jobs where you can be home in bed asleep and get in all kinds of trouble and have no idea it was even happening. But my wife and I had this little game we would play, and every morning when I would get up, I would look to her and I would say, "Good day or bad day," because she would look at the paper first, and based upon what was in the papers, whether I was going to have a good day or a bad day. And back then, the superintendent of schools and I used to have a little game, because if there was something going on with the school district and they call it above the front fold in the paper, I'd call him and go, "Thank you," because it was off me that day. And then there'd be days when I look at the paper and, oh my God, and he'd call me and say, "Thank you." Play this little game back and forth. But on the police department, I was concerned about the officers, the safety of the officers, the budget, and things like that. So it was pretty well compartmentalized. When I became the city manager, it's basically everything. And again, there's a lot of things you don't have any control over. Most people in the city, when they flushed the toilet, they just wanted it to go away. They didn't care where it went as long as it wasn't in their basement. Well, I had to worry about where it was going to go. And we were having some budgetary problems and trying to keep that all in balance. And back then, I think we had about 500 city employees back then. And so to answer your question, I won't say probably, I enjoyed being the chief more than being the city manager, I'll be honest with you about that. There were days, to be candid with you, I would be at kind of a corner office at the Civic Center, and I'd hear a siren and look out the window and see a squad car going north on Franklin Street. And I'd go, "Oh, I wish I was back in that car again." But yeah, it was a different challenges, shall I say. A lot more into the politics that would play from time to time, where you were a little bit more insulated as a chief in that. And one thing that people would always ask me was, when I became the city manager, if I would be biased towards the police department. And one of my answers was no, because I knew the police department, I knew the budget, I could tell you where every dime went. If anything, they were on the bad side because I knew them. I knew when on personnel budgets, there were times when the officers weren't there, so therefore there were gaps in the authorized strength based upon how the actual officers were deployed. And I knew because of that there'd be a little bit extra money in the personnel services, and sometimes in overtime. And that wasn't to their benefit from time to time. But, and I had learned a lot. I had to learn a lot about other city services. I was fortunate because a lot of the department heads I'd kind of grown up with within the city, so I knew them very well, and there were some very fine individuals that worked there. But it was different. It really was. And I don't know how Todd would answer this question, but when you leave, you really miss it. You really do. You miss, as he said, you miss the people. You think back on the things you've done that really meant something. Like you've got people off the street, you've got crimes solved, but then there are other crimes that that you didn't get solved, that really, you really, as of today, I still think about T.J. Davidson. That's the little boy that disappeared. I know John Necker worked on that a lot. I don't think that's ever been resolved. And that's one that sticks. And like I said, I really thank you, Todd, and your people for that, Hall Gordon solving that. That was one that really bothered us back then. We worked.
We built on what you had and what you guys did, and it was just a matter of technology and.
DNA made all the difference in the world in a lot of times. Yeah.
That guy was from Texas.
Yeah. But, yeah, we still come back to Decatur. This is our second trip this year. We come in, see people, maybe get some gooseberries for gooseberry pie. They have a farm northeast of here, and they have gooseberries. They were kind enough to give my wife some gooseberries, and we made gooseberry pie. You ever had a gooseberry pie? Very tart. Boy, was that tart. But anyway, we still get back from time to time. Run into old friends and maybe some new friends. Any other questions? I hope we're doing okay on time.
Roger, I don't have a question.
Oh boy. Officer Berniking.
Tell him to sit down.
Oh, that's not bad. I came on in '75, went to third shift, and when you first come on.
Good to see you. Have fun. We'll let you
We
know
do
when we're
three
back
things.
again, okay? Sorry.
We give you with a disc golf,
Good to see you.
which was Williams. FTO for that. And then they put you in a traffic car. And then on weekends, they put you in a paddy wagon. Get in the car with Officer Williams, he would say, you know, if we go on a detail afterwards and stuff, you got any questions, let's talk about it, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Get in the car with Officer Mickler, sit there, shut up, listen, and watch. Yes or no?
I don't remember, it's a long time ago.
Well, I hope you don't remember this, I do. But I'm with Officer Mickler, traffic car, and for like a week, that's what you do. You just watch, listen to him on how he does the traffic stop. So finally, about 2 weeks later, he lets me drive. So I'm gonna do the radar, I'm gonna do the stopping, writing the ticket, and everything like that. We're sitting at the drive-in on North Jasper. We're catching traffic going north. Catch the speeder, pull them over up there by Pershing. Get out, I go up there and I do everything. Officer Mickler is at the right rear of this vehicle, just standing there watching everything. So I get the driver's license, do all my bits, come back, and I'm facing him. So I'm basically facing south, and he says, you never lose sight of the vehicle. He said, you always gotta be trained on the vehicle. I said, okay, so I turn around, I'm looking at the vehicle, he's standing there, and he said, okay, how'd you go? And I said, well, I did this. Okay, what are you gonna do? I said, well, I'm gonna write a ticket for this. He said, okay. Now you wanna go get the car? And I left the car in neutral. It wasn't rolling fast, but it was rolling.
Thanks for that recollection there.
You came out better on that than I did. How that happened.
But we had serious situations. I mean, if you drive down the street and then discuss it and like laugh about it or get it off your chest, but then there's also times that it was comical.
I was an FPO also. The most terrifying thing for me was letting a new officer drive. I just knew I was gonna die. But right here.
Anyone else have any questions or comments or recollections?
I've got one. Hey, I was not in the police department. My name is Howard Mills. I've been a resident of Decatur all my life. I'm a Navy equipment officer. But I got to know, and I'm sure you all knew him, Rick Jones. Yep. He was in the old lawn group. He come around the corner, and there was a guy with a gun. And that was called a split second. Rick shot him. That guy had all intentions in the world of killing Rick. He had all the intentions in the world. And it still bothered Rick. He took it to human life. He had to. That split second, he'd come around the corner. One more. This is going back a little farther. There was a guy worked at Firestone. Third shift. He'd go to Lone Oak, get drunk, go home to his wife. She'd call the police. Did you hear that? This police officer thought it was an automobile. He pulled up by the house, got out of his car, started walking up the driveway. The guy kicked the door open and shot him several times. He lived. And they was, I was talking to a police officer here a while back, and he said he was able to, he completed his tour, best dude. I got all, like I said, I'm not just saying it to you, I got all the respect for police officers. I really do. Like I said, I knew Rick Jones real well. It bothered him to take human life, even though that human was had all intention of the world of killing. That's all I got.
The officer required sometimes to make split-second decisions that the press and everyone else has hours to think about and look at and things. But the officer has just a split second to make that decision. And you're right, those decisions will be in their minds for the rest of their lives. They really will be. Thanks for your comments.
And I consider him a very good friend of mine.
Yeah, I remember Rick. Yeah, he was on when I was on many, many years ago. Yes. Any other questions? I thank you for coming. It's been nice to see some of the, as we call ourselves, the old timer. And I appreciate your comments and sharing your stories because eventually that's very important, remembering those the good old days, as we call them, and seeing the smiling faces we work with and relied on each other for many, many, many years. And nice to see the representative of the state's attorney's office. Yeah. So thank you for coming. Thank you.